Good morning, ladies. I'm really excited about this discussion because I've got a little hurricane experience myself. I grew up in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, and let me tell you, when it was devastated by Hurricane Katrina, we saw that disaster is really the great equalizer, you know, destroying the homes of the rich, the poor, everyone pretty much lost everything at once. But the recovery tends to be less equal. What are you seeing here in Houston? Is the entire city moving forward together? And Gloria, I'd kind of like to really direct this to you. You're on the mayor's recovery team.
So the city is moving forward. I think partnering with the neighboring counties, we've made some strong headway to ensure that we have mitigation solutions long-term to make sure that we don't have the same kind of tragedy happen in the next disaster. For many of y'all who know, we've had 5 disasters in 3 years. So as a result, so many people have been impacted, and more importantly, there's so many unmet needs that have not been identified within the city of Houston. So the city of Houston is really trying to ensure that we capture the unmet needs so that we can ensure, one, the city receives its funding that it needs, whether it be from HUD, whether it be from FEMA, and then whether it be from the state of Texas through TDM. So unmet needs is something that's critical, but with work with the Harris County, we are totally working together to ensure that all the necessary dollars are coming to Houston and the Harris County area.
Either of you ladies have any thoughts on that? How we're doing?
There's always folks who fall below the radar, and I'm going to take a little exception to one of the things you said. The storm is a great equalizer, but there is undercurrent here in the city from the fact that many of the homes were actually flooded by the government and the Army Corps of Engineers and the San Jacinto River Authority. So you have that aspect of a lack of trust.
Man-made disaster, right, creates that, absolutely. You know, another thing that we saw after a major disaster is that elected officials, whether past or present, have these woulda, coulda, shoulda moments of introspection, you know, where they go, gosh, when I was in office, did I do enough to keep the people of my city safe? Did we spend enough on mitigation? Did we stop enough development? Did you have, Annise, any of those moments of introspection yourself during Harvey?
Well, during Harvey, I was out of office, and I will say that that's the time I missed being in office the most. I wanted to do something. And fortunately, I had the opportunity, thanks to Angela, to work at the NRG Center on the evacuation shelter. And for 3 weeks, I was spending 18 hours a day as the sort of the daytime manager at that shelter. And I was doing something. But the overlapping jurisdictions, if I had it to do over again, I played small ball. I was like, what could I do in the city of Houston with the tools in my hands? And I focused on the city development codes, small things. There really wasn't anybody, and in my view, it was a failure on the part of the state of Texas, and particularly probably the land commissioner, maybe the governor, to put people in a room together across multiple jurisdictions and make us play nicely. And what ended up happening, many of us were doing things, but we were doing it in our own lanes.
So there were communities, counties working together, all saying, we've got to focus on this and do something.
We were talking to each other, but we weren't really working together. We were working in parallel. A lot of big national issues that happens. Great organizations doing good work, but they never converge on the problem. They continue to operate in parallel.
Angela, Annise just mentioned the shelter. We've got a picture of one of the shelters in the city up. I know you did something so remarkable, being able to help stand up a shelter for 10,000 people in less than 24 hours. I'm thrilled to hear about just how you did that. But I'd also love to know more about what Baker-Ripley is doing today in the recovery. I mean, the numbers I have here, you've helped 21,000 households. You've distributed $11.1 million. And in a quote in the media recently, you said, we have people out there that are still coming in because they cannot make their way through the convoluted bureaucracies.
So where to begin? So one of the things that was extraordinary about Harvey, and it's an opportunity to say thank you to the people in the room, is the longest lines and the most unmanageable part of operating the shelter was that so many of you showed up to help. And that was the entrance that actually proved a challenge. And it's this outpouring of generosity, this desire people have to be in solidarity with their neighbors when they're affected by a disaster that we took great advantage of, and that allowed us in a few hours to stand up a shelter with the generous volunteers in Houston. Our typical role at BakerRipley, and my long-term specialty, is in the long-term recovery. It's in the journey of when everything's wiped away, how do we start again as individuals and in a community? And more importantly, is what must cities do in a time when we see increasing displacement? So there are over 68 million people worldwide forcibly displaced by disaster, war or weather, not living in their own homes. And they come to cities. And we experienced it in Katrina, when you have over 100,000 people show up for dinner and you didn't plan for it. And so all cities must have this capacity to harness that generosity, not only in the immediate aftermath, to spread it across the real recovery period, which looks more like 3 to 5 years. So in the long-term recovery process, there are several stages, but one of the critical ones where people really need help is right at about a year, you come to a fork in the road. It's like on one hand, one fork says, this is my lot now, it's resignation. It looks, if you walk into the home, like it's been gutted and nothing else has been done, and they're not moving forward because it's become overwhelming and exhausting. And for seniors, often terrifying, their fear of losing their home. It's stalled. Or the other path is you've had some help, you've navigated the bureaucracies of insurance and FEMA and aid, and now you've been able to put the pieces together and move forward. The most important unit of recovery is still the individual in their home. And the reason, you lose the home, you lose the neighborhood, you lose the tax benefit, you lose your economy, you lose your opportunities for people. And I've been famous for saying, I don't care how many poor people there are. I'm still going to say that. I don't care how many poor people there are in Houston. I care if they get up and do everything they know how to do. It should add up to a way of life that gives them something to look forward to. It should add up to opportunity. So I care about whether or not you do everything you know how to do, put together all the aid you can you remake your life? Mm-hmm. And I think the case management it's not sexy sounding, but it's critical to help people make decisions and avoid mistakes with the scarce resources at their disposal.
Right. I'd like to go to Gloria. Angela mentioned capacity. And that has been so important in this city because federal aid hasn't been flowing really quickly. I know that the city announced last week that $1 billion in federal recovery aid for individuals is finally going to start flowing next month. You've been really working directly with FEMA. Tell me how that aspect of the recovery is going.
So right after Harvey, the city received $163 million, of which $56.2 million was for emergency protective services. That was for overtime for police and fire and some emergency purchase orders. Another $112 million was for storm debris. As y'all remember, there were tons of debris out on the streets that needed to be picked up. I'd like to pose a question to the audience. How much money do you think would you envision 15 months later coming from FEMA to the city of Houston? Any ideas?
Shout out.
$3 million, $3.3 million. And that is very interesting and challenging from the city's end to know that we have spent alone on the city side, just for city infrastructure, almost $200 million to get into some of the buildings that were impacted. And we're talking about libraries and City Hall and the annex and municipal courts. So while the city has put out, almost $200 million, what FEMA has reduced is only $3.3 million. And actually that funding, Angela, was coming for non-congregate sheltering. Mm-hmm. So it was the immediate housing that came in. So the challenge that we have is The money is dwindling, coming in little by little, but more importantly, the funding that you talked about, Kathleen, has to do with housing and urban development. It's the CDBG disaster recovery dollars that are coming in, and again, people say, why is it taking so long? It's a bureaucracy all the way from the feds as it comes down to the state, and then ultimately to the city of Houston. So while that is a challenge, the good news is I think the city has been able to put plans in effect in order to determine how do we use that money, whether it be on mitigation needs, on infrastructure, on individual housing, the case management that Angela has mentioned. It was critical for us to ensure that procurements were put in place proactively so that we would be FEMA compliant and HUD compliant. Because what we don't want to have happen is receive this federal money, whether it be through HUD or through FEMA, and then have to pay it back because every I was dotted and T was not crossed.
And that happens a lot.
Yeah. Exactly. So one of the things that our mayor has challenged is that we're maximizing recovery, reducing potential deobligations, and the slow process of the funds coming in has helped us to get ourselves together for that.
Annise, when it comes to mitigation, that can sometimes be something that's really hard to rally public support for. Have you been surprised at how since the hurricane now the city has increased the elevation requirements in the floodplain? Harris County, on the anniversary of the hurricane in August, passed this $2.5 billion bond issue that will quadruple the monies for mitigation. Have you said, why don't we have that support before the storm?
Houstonians have always understood that there is no free lunch. You have to pay for the infrastructure investments, and our bond elections have been successful. One of the problems, though, is that $2 billion is a fraction of what's needed. We've been paralyzed in the region. To our east, you have the Gulf, and you have the potential for hurricanes. To our west, we are the funnel that leads the water that falls in, the Austin area in Central Texas. We're between it and the ocean, and we have needed to make a multi-billion-dollar investment in more flood mitigation reservoirs on that side. So we had a lion on one side and a tiger on the other side, and we just did this, and we're not gonna. We can't figure out where to spend our money, and we couldn't reach a regional consensus on what to do it. I really salute Judge Emmett and Harris County for stepping up and making the decision to begin the investment, but it's a beginning investment. This area flooded before there was a single human being here. It is a fact of our geography, and we are going to have to figure out how to live with it and be more resilient going forward.
Before we go to the audience for questions, I would love to ask you ladies what you think then about, say, Houston Stronger's 8-county plan that would spend like $60 billion on mitigation. I mean, is there yet a real definitive concept of what a flood-resilient Houston will look like?
So it's my great hope that some of that money gets spent on innovation. As I travel the world and watch what cities and communities do after storms, it's a great opportunity to rethink the materials you use, the design of the structures that you build. We should take advantage of the opportunity to be creative and innovative. And I just returned from Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico was pretty much told you're on your own, and they used the you're on your own opportunity to create some mini grids that communities could use for power in the event the power is down, to look at brand new materials to use for homes that would actually take on water and then be able to rebuild more quickly. I think Houston wants recovery, so we want to go right back to what we had as quickly as possible, and we need to renew, that is, go forward to something new and different, because we will have to live with water. That's true.
Gloria?
One of the things that we're doing is working closely with Harris County on mitigation options. We have the flood czar, everybody knows Stephen Costello, who's really, his whole job is to look at innovative options on how to deal with mitigation within the city of Houston. We've submitted our prioritization through TDM in order to look at these are the kind of projects that we want to do. What does that look like? Whether it be for city infrastructure, whether it be for long-term water flowways through the Lake Houston Dam. I mean, there are many of opportunities, and I will say in the past, you know, even from back in the day with Mayor Lanier and some of the other, there was no need or no support, I think, for mitigation options. So finally we realized, wait a minute, Houston has left money on the table, and until we get the plans together in order to seek some mitigation dollars, this 8-county consortium that Kathleen is referencing would help to fortify, move forward, renew, and build a stronger region. And that's kind of what we're looking for. But it's not something that happens overnight. As many of y'all know, the Ike Dike that had been discussed back during Hurricane Ike, just last month, funding was secured in order to that. So that was something that it took 16 years to get to the point. I'm hoping we don't wait 16 years to ensure all the mitigation dollars that are coming to the Houston and Harris County area are not spent appropriately, but it's a long-term solution, and it's going to take some time to get us to that point.
All right, let's go to questions. And we have one right here in the front. Wait, let's wait for the microphone. We've got a mic runner coming your way. And if you would introduce yourself, please.
I'm Mayor Scott of Brookshire, Texas, and it's not really a question, it's a compliment. Thank you, you fine leaders, for fearlessly telling the truth.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, maybe on this side. Let's be equal opportunity back here.
Hi, my name is Margaret Adams. I have a question for Ms. Blanchard from BakerRipley. You mentioned that a year after a disaster, you see kind of paths diverge, and that you've got those who are able to persevere and those who are overwhelmed. From a recovery perspective, what can a community do to help those who have become overwhelmed? Because obviously, we can't move forward if we don't bring everybody with us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you're talking about a specific neighborhood, what can you do? It's a careful observation of your neighbors. If 3 houses got water and 3 houses had gotten repair and the 4th has not, something's wrong. And obviously that person, many times seniors will not admit to damage there for fear of losing their home. So seniors are particularly vulnerable, as are people, as Annise quite frequently reminds us, people with concerns for their documentation status may not want to open up about damage in their home. So in your community, that's one thing you can do. I think beyond that, it's a better overall sense. We don't have a clear sense of the risk involved. I think the city and the county are both doing much more, and many of you in this room, to educate communities about the choices they're making. If you continue to live here, you will be flooded. And so those two things, people not connected to their neighborhoods with no one checking on them, are the ones that get bogged down, get overwhelmed. Where you have people checking on them and people saying, this is how we did it, here's how you can do it, we'll find someone to help you, they are able to move forward better. I want to make one short comment. Sure. In previous disasters, FEMA provided to directly through the county and the city to case management organizations the information about who was impacted. This time it was only provided in aggregate. So every person who had already filed with FEMA had to refile and then find a case management agency, be linked through 211, which we did as fast as we could, but we lost valuable time not having our own information about who was affected and where those pockets of where many people that were affected existed. So we should demand, these are our people, this is our information, and going forward, we need that information, we need it immediately. So people don't have to find us, we can find them quickly.
Well, let's hope FEMA's listening. All right, let's go to another question. Here, back on this side.
Hello, my name is Fahad. Thank you. This was such a good conversation. The concept of renewing versus recovering was really interesting, and my question is to all three. How do you renew at a time when people are trying to survive? How do you try to innovate when people are trying to survive and when there's capacity constraint?
Okay. Who would like to take that?
You know, I think that you underestimate people's ability to adapt to circumstances and thrive once, and there are always capacity constraints. Crisis gives you an opportunity to rethink what you do. It gives often an opportunity for a fresh slate to start over. It certainly gives, here in this region, it's given us an opportunity from a government standpoint to make changes that were politically unpalatable or impossible before. But this isn't, kind of going back to the last question as well, we have to have a real conversation because everybody wants to get back to normal as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
You have to understand there is a new normal. It's not what we were before. And this is, as Angela said, a major disaster recovery. It's 3 to 5 years to the new normal, not to get back to where you were. Right. And we don't talk about that enough. And for those who are unaffected, or largely, there are large swaths of this region who had no damage. And, you know, a week after the storm, when the rain finally stopped, we were all back to work. And we have to continue to remind people that this is an ongoing process and that it's not, here we're done going forward.
I would just end by saying that we have to build forward, not build back. And it's really just following up from Annise's conversation and comment. Building forward requires innovation, requires communication, requires partnerships throughout the county, throughout the city, and throughout the surrounding counties.
And thank you, audience, for your fabulous questions. And join me in thanking my wonderful guests. Were they fabulous or what? Annise, Angela, Gloria. Thank you, ladies.